What's going on, everybody? I kind of cut that short a little bit. My bad. Welcome back to Reform Perspective. I'm Josiah Espinoza,
And I am Princess Espinoza.
and today we're going to be talking just talking with one another about ministry and about what we want to see the Lord doing in the future with revival. And so I got Facebook pulled up on my phone, so feel free to talk with us. Feel free to ask us questions, and we'll just get right into it. Uh, we started doing ministry work about 8 years ago now.
Together.
Together, yeah, about 8 years ago now. And I know it's not much, but I think we've gone through pretty significant events in our life together. Just make sure you talk into the microphone, or else they won't hear you. Just right up to your lips like that, and then they'll be able to hear you nice and loud. Um, but even though we've only been doing ministry for about 8 years, we've seen things and experienced things that I think everyone in ministry has experienced to a certain degree or another. Maybe you can kind of share with us what's been your desire to do. What kind of ministry work have you desired to do? What kind of ministry work have you done? What have you been engaged with? Yeah.
That was like 50 questions.
It's cool. We got 50 hours to talk, so
What ministry work have I done? I would say I have done ministry in nursery. So I've been involved in child care, whether it be teaching third graders, whether it be teaching 5-year-olds, whether it be in the nursery. I've been involved in all sorts of areas. There was a time where we did the youth
yeah, together for a little bit.
together for a little bit. Also, I've been in worship on the worship team for a while. I don't know.
Yeah, let us know if you can hear us too, because Princess has the voice of a mouse when she's talking into a microphone.
No, he has a tendency of like, oh, we're going to talk about something. We get on here and then he asks me something. It puts me on blast and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I need to think for a little bit. Hold on.
No, it's all good. So, yeah, we've been involved in different. We even went to like Walmart's and we'd play evangelism at Walmart's. I'd play my guitar. We had
Yeah.
Becca with us. She was just a baby.
Mm.
So we've been involved in some sort of ministry, or another. What's up, Thomas? Appreciate you.
We've cleaned toilets
Yeah, we
at the church.
we volunteered to clean, and I still clean the church. I'll do anything. We'll do anything together. But there's something about being in ministry together that eventually gets you to the point where you start seeing the things behind the scenes.
Would having like home groups be part
Yeah,
of ministry?
yeah, absolutely. Of
We've
course.
done that.
Yeah, we've done home groups
We
together.
still doing.
Yeah, we're still doing home groups.
We're on a
Everything
little break, but
everything we've done since we started doing ministry together, it's the same things that we're doing today. Evangelism, worship, children ministry, home group, Bible teaching. I've been involved in some sort of those aspects of ministry or another for the last 8 years. And so the more that we've been involved in ministry, the more we've seen the behind the scenes aspects of church,
yeah.
which most people call the politics of the church. And so we've seen and experienced things for 8 years now. Again, it's not a long time, but I think it is a significant amount of time because there's been several things that have taken place that have discouraged us, that have hurt us, that have caused us to rethink our purpose in ministry, that has caused us to question, are we really doing what God has called us to do? I know there's been many years of frustration for you not knowing what you're supposed to be called to do, and
Mhm.
um, because I know it's easier when you don't have kids.
Absolutely, it is.
It's easier when you don't have kids, of course. And
But
so,
that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I don't think
mhm,
we've ever even thought about
yeah.
stepping back because of the excuse of having kids. It it almost didn't change after
Hmm.
having Becca. It was almost like we didn't have a child. We were still able to do everything. But the more kids we had, the more difficult it was. But we just didn't want to say, you know what, we're going to take a break from this, because I feel like you get into this cycle where you say, well, when my child is 3 years old, or when my child is 4 years
Mm-hmm,
old, or
mm-hmm.
when my child is 5, and it just continues on, and it just gets harder and harder for you to jump back into ministry and serve the Lord.
Yeah, so that's a good point that we can start talking about.
Mm.
Family obviously puts some restrictions on what you can do
Mm.
in ministry.
Yeah.
But family is never the excuse to not do ministry. And what we mean by ministry, we're not talking about preaching from the pulpit, and
Mm.
we're not talking about being the worship leader. We're not talking about being the evangelist, the head evangelist. We're not talking about being a prophet. We're not talking about those things.
Mm.
We're talking about practical, um, daily things that you can do in the body of Christ that could be the work, that can be considered the work of ministry.
That can be serving
Hmm.
God.
Whether that's as simple as reaching out to people within the congregation,
Mm.
just being with the congregation, serving to one capacity or another, even if it's in the small things.
Mm.
Because I think what ends up happening is, like you said, there are people that see the politics in church and
Mm.
are so dismayed and discouraged by it that they just say, you know what, I'm just not going to serve anymore.
Mm.
But again, why are we serving to begin with? Yeah.
And my answer to that would be, we are serving out of gratitude to what Christ has done for us.
Yeah.
Because when I think about it, I'm just like, what did Christ do for me? And that is absolutely everything. He has done everything for me. There is nothing that I could possibly do to repay him.
Yeah.
There just isn't. But because I love him so much and I am so grateful to him, I look for different ways to serve him wherever it is needed. Even if I don't necessarily like to do it, I say, you know what, Lord, you didn't want to die on the cross. You did it. He did it. And he suffered for it. But he asked God before, is there any other way?
Mm-hmm.
And because he realized there was no other way, he did it willingly.
Right. Well, it's not that he didn't want to. He knew what he was called to do.
Yes. But
He
what I
knew,
mean is, like,
mhm.
it was painful. It wasn't something that he was like,
He didn't want to
yes.
endure pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
And
wasn't
not
like,
just pain. He
uh-huh.
didn't want to endure the wrath of God.
Mm.
But what's even more amazing than that is
Mm.
he didn't have to, in order to accomplish what he accomplished, he didn't have to befriend 12 men, and even less, he didn't have to befriend um, Judas Iscariot, who was
Mm-hmm.
going to betray him. But he did it
Mm-hmm.
in order to provide for us an example of
Mm-hmm.
what it means to love one another and to serve one
Mm-hmm.
another. And secondly, what it looks like when you're betrayed by the one you love
Mm-hmm.
and by the one that claims to
Absolutely.
love you.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Jesus is the greatest example of a pastor, of a humble pastor, and a selfless pastor that we could ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the point that I'm trying to get at is, as you serve in the ministry, you'll see things that you won't like.
Mm-hmm.
You'll hear about things that you don't appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
You'll feel like you're being taken for granted. You'll feel like you're not being recognized. You'll feel like you're alone,
Mm-hmm.
and you may search for fellowship, and might not come the way that you expect it to. Or if it does, it may take years for you to finally get to that point
Mm-hmm.
where you do have that fellowship
Mm-hmm.
the way that you've been desiring it. I mean, how long have I been praying that God would send men in my life that are passionate for his kingdom and are looking for a movement of God in such a way that they dedicate their entire life?
I would say about 8 years.
8 years, right?
Yeah, about 8 years. Mm-hmm.
and um, and so there's heartaches, there's disappointments, there's disagreements, there's frustrations, there's all these realities that go along with serving God,
Mm-hmm.
but they're never, if you're truly called to serve, if you're truly called to the body, if you're truly called to the kingdom and to the work of the kingdom, all of those frustrations, all of those disappointments, all of those pains are never, should never be a crutch,
Mm-hmm.
or should never cause for you to be so overwhelmed with disappointment that you say, I give up.
Mm-hmm.
I give up. No more ministry for me.
Mm-hmm.
The people that I want to love don't love me. The people that I care about don't care about me. The people that I have tried to serve have hurt me. And the point is, you're making it all about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. I'm a human. I've been there too.
Mm-hmm.
I've felt those frustrations. I've experienced those pains before. And you've
Mm-hmm.
experienced those pains before.
Yeah.
Where you've said to me over and over again, all I want is just a friend. Somebody who would be willing to text me and I can text them and we can just get together and we can just pour into each other, and
Mm-hmm.
they're passionate about their family and about the kingdom and about the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And how long has it been since you've had something like that? Pardon.
8 years.
About 8 years, yeah. Yeah, about 8 years. And it's not like we haven't loved anyone.
No, we have plenty of people we love now.
Mhm.
Absolutely, we do. We have plenty of people.
But those things have not prevented us from doing the work of ministry.
Mm-mm.
Even when we were at our most disheartened and disappointed and discouraged point
Mm-hmm.
of our walk, we've always made the effort to serve
Mm-hmm.
in one level or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the mindset of most Christians is, if I'm discouraged, I won't serve until I am encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is they don't serve and then they just keep getting discouraged
Mm-hmm.
because they're not serving.
Mm-hmm.
They're not using the gifts
I
that God has
think I
given
think
them.
their mentality is, because my heart is not wholeheartedly in it, that I'm just basically doing this out of like, because I have to,
Hmm.
and my heart is not doing it with gratitude.
But here's the thing is, I think a heart that truly is in it is the heart that even when it feels like it's not in it, continues to be committed to the run, to the race, to the fight.
And I think in even those areas, like, God is faithful.
Yeah.
He sees the obedience that you have shown,
Yeah.
and he will somehow find a way to encourage you, find a way to motivate you. Somebody will come up to you out of nowhere and just tell you how grateful they are for you.
Hmm.
Somebody that you didn't even realize was watching,
Yeah.
had no idea was probably even part of the church,
Yeah.
and just randomly will walk up to you and just say thank you for what you're doing for the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think what ends up happening with a lot of, especially with a lot of younger men,
Mm-hmm.
like our generation, young men and women, is that they may be looking for this ideal image of what ministry looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And if that ideal image isn't fulfilled by a prominent leader or a prominent person, or even by brothers that they think should fulfill those things,
Mm.
then they could be discouraged. I felt like that plenty of times. I've voiced that to you plenty of times where I have genuinely felt like I don't have the men that I need in my life in order to encourage me and disciple me and mentor me. Um, but again, even when I've felt like I haven't had that, that has never dissuade me from serving the Lord with all my heart. Even though there were plenty of times where my heart was like, all right, here's another week, here's another time of worship, here's another evangelism event, here's another time of preaching the word. And I love all those things. My heart is stirred for the Lord and all of those things. But even in ministry, you can have that sense of like, all right, we're just pushing through, pushing through, pushing through, you know. And young ministers need to be okay with that. You know, young mothers need to be okay with that. Why don't you talk a little bit about that struggle you've had before with ministry and being a young mom? There's so much to say.
Um, it it was difficult. There have been times where it's difficult because I know that there are talents that the Lord has given me, and some of them are very pleasurable ones, and others not so much. He's given me different capabilities, and like I said, I've always strived to see where I am needed.
Yeah.
So there's been plenty of times where I love to play the keyboard. I specifically asked the Lord to help me learn to play the keyboard
Yeah.
so that way I could play for Him. I wanted to use it to worship Him. But there have been many, many times where I'm not needed when it was about playing worship. I was needed in other areas, for example, in the nursery or cleaning or ushering or different areas.
Yeah.
And I submitted to the Lord and I said, you know what, Lord, I know that I have these abilities to play for you and to worship you and do that for you at church, but I'm not needed in those areas. And because of that, I have to step back and do what other things you have called me to. And those are struggles because my heart longed for one thing and the Lord said, no, this is not about you. This is about me.
Yeah.
There's been plenty of times where I've wanted to do many different things and I haven't been able to because of the kids.
Yeah.
But when there is an opportunity to do something like evangelizing, or even when I have to, now that I'm able to play worship and I have to bring my kids along, I do not ever try and use that excuse because you are teaching your kids to serve the Lord. You're teaching them you are a priority. I love you, but I'm teaching you what it means to serve the Lord. Even if I have to struggle a little bit with you, even if you're going to be cranky, we're all hungry, we're all tired, it's hot, we're sweating. This is what it means to serve the Lord. It's not always going to be convenient. It's not always going to be comfortable, but it always going to be fulfilling because we are doing it for the Lord.
Yeah, and my kids aren't missing out on anything. Like even me growing up and you growing up, we went to church almost all the time. 3-4 days out of the week sometimes.
Or
And
5 or 6
or
days.
5 or 6 or however many days that our parents took us. I grew up as a pastor's kid, so I was always around ministry things. And I can genuinely tell people that I didn't miss out on anything as a kid. I didn't miss out on anything as a teenager because my dad was purposeful about spending time with us, taking us on vacation, and all those things are excellent things. But when we use our children as an excuse to say, I just don't want I just don't want to use or to abuse my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want my kids to feel like they're not the
Neglected.
priority or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, if you're training your children to love the Lord, to love His people,
Mm-hmm.
and they see you dedicating your life to the work of God above all else, they'll respect you.
Mm-hmm.
They'll respect you. And of course, you do have to find that healthy balance
Mm-hmm.
between ministry and
Mm-hmm.
caring for your family.
And I think
Yeah.
a thing you also have to teach them is your priority is not the church.
Yeah.
They must know and not mistake that
Yeah.
when they look at you going to church and doing things for the church and they say, but you're always at church or you're always doing things for the church. We need to remind them, my priority is not the church.
Right.
My priority is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I am doing everything that I possibly can to serve Christ wherever it is. And you're going to learn to serve Christ with me.
Yeah. And um, obviously, we do need to be careful with ensuring that we don't conflate church with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because sometimes serving Christ does mean taking time to serve your family and to be with your family.
Mm-hmm.
But when your family becomes, again, a crutch
Mm-hmm.
to say, I'm just going to wait until my kid's old enough, or I'm just going to wait until, I don't have to deal so much with a little one, and then I'll start serving. But by that time, if you've had 3 or 4 kids, you've already missed out on 8 or 10 years of being able to serve the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Or you put your kids in a sports program that just consumes your time, and you have the gifts, you have the talents to be able to serve God to great capacity, and yet you're throwing everything into your kids because you love your kids, obviously, and it's not an evil thing, but it can become a problem and an evil thing when you put your own kids above Christ
Mm-hmm.
and to serve Christ, because then your kids become your idolatrous.
Your idol.
Yeah, it becomes your idol in your
Mm-hmm.
life. And again, I think it's good. I think it's very beautiful when a father and a mother love their kids rightly, and they put them in extracurricular activities. But that is the purpose of everything that they do above serving Christ,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think that can be a real issue and becomes an idolatry, and it becomes idolatrous in your life. And my kids know that I love them, but they also know that I love Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids ask me, "So are you going to church, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to church." "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing Wednesday night Bible study, and we're
Mm-hmm.
doing practice today." And my kids know that I have dedicated myself to the church and to the people of my church and to Christ. They know that, but I also make time for them, and I spend time with them,
Mm-hmm.
and we go on vacation and we go camping and we do all kinds of things with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when I saw that with my dad, they're gonna see that from me, and they're not gonna miss out on their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I know that for young mothers, some young mothers can use their kids as a, or maybe the careers of their husbands, or whatever it can be. They can use those things as a
An excuse.
yeah, like an excuse to
Mm-hmm.
not fully dedicate themselves to people in the church, not to dedicate themselves to serve at the church. And it can be more than that. It can be that on top of pains in the church that they've
Mm-hmm.
experienced, on top of hurts or frustrations that they've experienced over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you're just like, well, either you're holding on to things that you can't let go,
Mm-hmm.
or you've given up.
Mm-hmm.
It's either one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you're not serving. And obviously, the reason we're talking about this is because we desire to see young passionate families. Of course, all families from every generation.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see all families from every generation. But because I'm a millennial, I can speak into my generation
Mm-hmm.
because I know how we are. We're overly emotional, um, easily hurt,
Mm-hmm. Easily offended.
easily offended. And my
Mm-hmm.
hope and my desire is that we wake up
Mm-hmm.
and that we can see that there is such a need for young, passionate families on top of the other families, of course, at churches. But there's such a need for a zeal for God.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have something?
No, I'm listening.
Oh,
Go ahead.
there's such a need for a zeal for God in young families
Mm-hmm.
that say, regardless of hurt,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of um, whether or not my kids want to play football or baseball, or whether or not my kids are um, becoming my excuse, they'll say they won't hinder me from serving God,
Mm-hmm.
and to the capacity that we want to see God move,
Mm-hmm.
because we want to see revival.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we desire. That's what I desire. I want to see droves of millennial families
Mm-hmm.
just giving their all to God,
Mm-hmm.
because every generation has seen some form of revival
Mm-hmm.
or another. And I think we're at like the precipice of that. We're like right on the edge of that, because I see that the Lord is starting to stir things
Mm-hmm.
in the hearts of these younger families, because they're the future of the church.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I think I want to address a few different things. I think firstly, you're talking about um, overly tired moms,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand. I've been there. Trust me. I understand that there are periods of time where you really do need to step back, because
Yep.
having newborn children
Right.
and other children to tend to is exhausting
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
in and of itself. It is exhausting. But there comes a time where you're able to, they're a little bit older, they're not babies anymore, they're not waking up through the night anymore. There comes a time where we have to say, all right, am I going to continue to use my child as this excuse? Because before it truly was like an actual
But it
excuse.
wasn't an excuse in a sense of what we're talking about, but it was just
Like it
it
was truth is what I'm
yeah,
saying.
it was it's a season.
It's a
Yeah.
season in your life. So you come to a point where it starts to change. You have a
Mhm.
little bit more time. You're not as exhausted.
Yeah.
That is a time where you have to say, okay, I need to start serving again. I have a little bit more time. I have the ability. I can be used in any area.
Mhm. Yeah.
You have the ability to do that. So
Yeah.
please, please don't neg- neglect serving your Lord and Savior.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen over and over again is
Mm-hmm.
since because we've been in 4 different church contexts
Mm-hmm.
in the past 8 years, because of
Mm-hmm.
military, because of schooling for me, just because of life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've seen in 4 different church contexts, um, young families that have been really passionate,
Mm-hmm.
and then young families that once were passionate
Mm-hmm.
that have lost that passion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what happens over time is young families, young married couples that get saved together, that go to church together, they have so much time and energy that they just pour everything out into
Mm-hmm.
the kingdom. And they're at church all the time. They do Bible studies at their home. They
Mm-hmm.
have fellowship with others. But
Mm-hmm.
then they have a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and that sets them back a little bit. And that puts them in a different kind of context. And then they have another kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then the husband gets a little better job and he starts making a little more money. So they buy a house. They start accumulating more bills. And so life just starts to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But what ends up happening with these young families is, on top of everything else, kids, job, money, responsibilities, bills, home, mortgage, all those things, on top of that, because they're so involved in ministry, they start to see the politics of the church,
Mm-hmm.
the bad decisions of the pastor, the sins of the eldership, or the sins of the senior pastor,
Mm-hmm.
or they see the apathy of the older generation, and they have so much zeal and so much passion. They're just like, let's just try things, let's
Mm-hmm.
just do things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the other generations, they always feel like they're being shut down, like they're being told, no, we have to wait, and no, you're going too fast. Pull the brakes a little bit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so they start getting callous in their heart, and they start getting more and more frustrated with waiting, and because they just want to see things, they want to see things. And it doesn't come from a place of evil;
Mm-hmm.
it just comes from a place of youth.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was me. And in a sense, it's still me to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
It's still me. But what ends up happening is for a lot of young couples, it gets just to the point where they're just like, why even keep trying then?
Mm-hmm.
I have a good job. I'm getting paid well. I have 4 kids now, 5 kids, 6 kids, whatever they have. I have to take care of their needs. I have to make sure they're going to school. Who has time for ministry if nobody wants to do anything anyways?
Mm-hmm.
And so that lethargic spirit kind of sets in,
Mm-hmm.
and they just think to themselves, well, if I just want to go 5 miles per hour,
Mm-hmm.
then what's the point of even trying to do 10 if no one else wants to do 10
Mm-hmm.
or 20 or 30 or 40? Because I'm the kind of guy that says I want to go 150 all the time.
He doesn't actually go 150
But
on the road ever.
but the thing is, I don't need
Mm-hmm.
for others to go 150
Mm-hmm.
all the time with me. But I would like to see that as I am trying to do things, or as the leadership of our church wants to do things, or younger leadership at other churches want to do things, I'm pretty sure every pastor just wants to see young families with that same zeal, that same passion that they've heard over and over and over again in past generations,
Mm-hmm.
that they just can't seem to find in this
Mm-hmm.
this generation. And so I don't know. It's a difficult thing because we do want revival. We cry out for it. We pray for it. We're waiting for it on one hand, but then on the other hand, we're not planting the seeds. We're
Mm-hmm.
not doing the long, laborious work. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the long, kind of repetitive work that is needed in order to see the harvest.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah.
And if you guys are watching, you guys have comments or questions, please feel free to do so. Because I don't think I have all the answers. I'm just talking here. Um, I'm just trying to think these things through with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm asking for your feedback. Because I don't
Well,
think I have the answers. I'm just talking.
no.
Yeah.
I think for another point that you hit on was hurt and pulling back because of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to do that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to do that. But when we think about it, when we pull back, when somebody hurts us, it hinders us from being able to receive blessings because,
Mm-hmm.
first off, you're pretty much saying because this person has hurt me, I'm going to make everybody else pay for that mistake.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to other people who have never done anything to you. Secondly, you're missing out on blessings because you don't know that's the person that the Lord might be sending your way to answer the prayers that you've had
Yeah.
for years and years. You're missing out on being able to have that blessing of a friendship or blessing them. Maybe the Lord is sending them your way so you can bless them. You don't know. But the reality of it is, in every relationship that you have, every single one of them, there's going to be struggles. There's going to be difficulty.
Yeah.
in any relationship, in a marital relationship, in a kid's relationship, in a friend relationship, in a mother daughter, father daughter, father son, in any relationship that you can think of, there's always going to be some sort of tension at some point,
Yeah.
some sort of argument at some point. You guys are not always going to get along and be happy 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So the fact is that those things are going to happen. You're going to get hurt by one another. You're going to do the hurting, or you're going to be the one receiving the hurt. But relationships matter. You need to put that time to try to get through that and try to restore the relationship. If that person doesn't want to, then you just pray for them, and it's hurtful to see them go, and it's hurtful to be hurt by them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But in reality, that is part of life. That is part of ministry. That is part of loving Christ and showing Christ to people even when they hurt us. It's just part of being in Christ.
Yeah, I think that's really important is because at the ordination on Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that they were talking about is
Mm-hmm.
get ready to be hurt by the people you love the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of young families are not prepared for that
Mm-hmm.
because they're so sheltered by it growing up until they start doing ministry work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, wait a second, I've always heard about how wonderful ministry was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Or they think, you guys are Christians. You guys are not supposed to hurt me.
Right.
And the reality is, we're people.
Yeah.
We're the same people you see out there. The only difference is that Christ has saved us.
Yeah.
But we're still learning. We're still growing. We're still going to make mistakes. And we need to learn to be gracious and forgiving, even when we don't want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Do I want to see a revival in our nation? Of course. Of course I want to see a revival. Of course I want to see people saved in droves. Of course I want to see people baptized into the kingdom. Of course I want to see churches, good biblical churches growing all across the nation. Of course I want to see young millennial, zillennial families coming to know the Lord, and even Gen Xers and baby boomers coming to the Lord in droves. I do want to see all of that. But it doesn't just happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't just wake up one day and you're like, hey, guess what? Something's happening around the world. You know, it comes through dedicated, selfless, sacrificial families.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time you've heard about a revival, it's always been centered around a group of passionate, zealous, on fire people
Mm-hmm.
that want to see it, that cry out for it, that pray for it, that get together constantly and seek after it and go out and preach the gospel together, that read scripture together, that cry out for an outpouring of the Spirit together. That's when you start to see those things happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from fasting, prayer, the preaching of the word, the solid preaching of the word, and the preaching of the gospel. That's always been the formula. But for some reason, whenever we talk about church revival or church revitalization even,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times we start to think about how we can engage the culture. How does our church draw people in?
Mm-hmm.
How do we become the place so that people just want to come to us? So that's how we've always been taught, is we need to become the place where people just want to come to us.
Mm-hmm.
But the social aspect of our culture is changing, so it's not so much about becoming a place where people want to come, but rather becoming the kind of people that go out
Mm-hmm.
to them and breaking those walls of hostility
Mm-hmm.
and drawing people in through genuine love and community. And that takes more work.
Mm-hmm.
That takes more work, and it takes more piety, and it takes more zealousness, and it takes more sacrifice. But that is what's required.
Mm-hmm.
in order to see that kind of move of God. Well, I do want, I mean, I don't know what else to talk about other than that. I mean, I think last night we prayed over one another.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I wanted to talk about this specifically is because that was part of our prayer,
Mm-hmm.
is that the Lord would continue to strengthen both of us
Mm-hmm.
as we continue to serve. Because I think right now we're like on a high, spiritual high. So it's easy to want to do everything when you're on that spiritual high.
Mm-hmm.
But 6 months from now,
Mm-hmm.
when that spiritual high is gone again, and it's just after Christmas and all the holidays,
Mm-hmm.
and people are going on vacation,
Mm-hmm.
and um, it's easy to become lethargic again. It's easy to say, well, I need time with my family,
Mm-hmm.
or I just recovering from the holidays, or
Mm-hmm.
we're going back into school again.
Mm-hmm.
What is that going to look like? And how are we going to continue to be faithful to what we've committed ourselves to?
By just keeping on. Honestly, by just keeping on, because we've been through so much, and it's not all just pain. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all just people hurting us.
Of course not.
There's been so many different things, whether it be sickness, whether it be financially, almost having nothing,
Mm-hmm.
moving back and forth. We've just been in so many different situations, and a lot of it was not pleasant ones. But the one constant thing that I knew I always had was being able to serve the Lord, even when I was in despair, even when I
Mm-hmm.
was, even to the point where I was possibly even, what is that word again?
Discouraged?
Not discouraged. When I was probably, it'll come to me. I'm sorry.
Depressed?
Depressed
Oh,
there.
okay.
When I was even possibly depressed, the one thing that I knew that I had was that even in those moments that was hard, I always was able to cry out to the Lord. I was always able to serve the Lord. And nothing, I don't think anything will ever change that for me, because even in those times where I was desperate and felt like I had nothing, I knew I had Christ. I knew I had Christ.
Yeah.
And even if he didn't give me anything, didn't make me feel better, didn't heal whoever was sick, didn't give me the money that I needed in order for my family to survive, what he had done up to that point was more than enough.
Mm-hmm.
More than enough. And because of that, I would always worship him. I would always praise him, and I will always boast about him.
Yeah. Amen. I think what can happen with some people is they they do go through roller coasters so much of like spiritual highs and spiritual lows.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true about everyone who's in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost impossible to find anyone who can say, since I've been in ministry, I have not gone through anything. Like, I think it's almost impossible to find that. If not impossible, if it happened to Jesus, it's going to happen to everyone.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what can happen is over time, because of all the lows that can happen in ministry,
Mm-hmm.
that during those lows, the heart can become kind of calloused. And even though that heart that can be callous towards ministry, even when they do find themselves in a spiritual high, they can't see it. They can't experience it. Even though they're there,
Mm-hmm.
they're in the presence of that spiritual revitalization or revival.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm afraid of is young families being calloused in their hearts, so that if they find themselves in these great movements of God and they're thinking to themselves, it's just emotion, or that nothing's happening right now. I haven't seen anything happen in 10 years. Why is that happening now? I haven't seen anything happen in 3 years. Why is that happening now?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very weary of allowing the enemy to rob me of my joy, even
Mm-hmm.
in the lows. Not my happiness, my joy.
I feel like I'm the opposite, because I think that because I'm in my lows, I search for Christ more. I long for Christ more, because I have nothing else.
Bring it up more.
And I feel like I'm just like, God, I have nothing else, but all I want right now is you. Just your presence, just you. That is all I need, and I will get through this. I will get through this. So sometimes I feel bad when I'm in my high, because I do feel like everything's okay right now. Everything is okay. I'm
Yeah.
like, give it a month, give it a week,
Mm-hmm.
and everything can change.
Yeah.
Everything could possibly change, but
Yeah.
I just want to be grateful in
Yeah.
at all times, in the good times and even in the bad times.
Yeah. And again, this conversation we're having is not to say that we have the final answers about anything or that we even have answers to anything at all, but rather we're just trying to let you all know that don't give up. You know, don't give up. It's way easier to give up. There have been moments in my walk with the Lord and in ministry where I thought to myself, maybe I should just focus on my family and working. Maybe I'll be happier that way. Maybe I'll be more joyful. I won't be so discouraged. I won't be so dismayed about, so when is it going to be, Lord? So what do you want me to do, Lord? Where am I headed, Lord?
I think
It,
something we have to take into consideration is that even though the Lord has shown us what he has called us for, I don't think there's ever a moment where you arrive at the calling.
mm-hmm,
I don't think there's ever a moment until the day that he takes us with him.
mm-hmm,
I really don't think so, because I mean, you have the calling to be a pastor. You were just ordained to be a pastor. But that calling, you're going to live out until your final days. I don't think you're ever going to say, I have arrived, I'm done. There's nothing more for me to do. It's a constant working it out.
No, of course, of course. And I think what my pastor said is right on because I asked him a question. I said, "How do you know when you're at the place that you're designed to be for, let's say, decades, where you're
Mm-hmm.
designed to be?" Because I think everyone who's called into some form of ministry or another
Mm-hmm.
finds themselves ultimately, if they're faithful to the Lord, if they're walking with the Lord, they find themselves in a place where they're like, "This is where I was designed by God to
Mm-hmm.
be and to flourish here for a time."
Mm-hmm.
So my question to them was, how do you know when you're there?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was, it's not by searching it out and then discovering it on your own, but rather as you're walking with the Lord, you just find yourself there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's so good. Like, because I think sometimes young ministers, young pastors, young men are constantly striving to find themselves there. I just want to be there because that was me.
Mm-hmm.
That's still to a certain degree me, less more or less, you know. I just want to find myself there, where I'm supposed to be, where I know that that I can flourish, that I can bring
And
about the
and I
glory of
guess
God.
what I meant by
Mhm.
it is, even when you say, okay, the Lord has called me, for example, for you,
Mhm.
the Lord has called me to be a pastor. I don't think you will ever stop questioning, Lord, is this what I'm supposed to be doing?
Mhm.
Not necessarily the pastoring, but where you are pastoring. I don't think that question will ever stop. And the reason for that is because we want to do what is the will of God. So we're constantly like, hey, Lord, is this truly where you want me? Am I doing what you have called me to do?
Yeah.
Is this the place? Is this the time? Is this the title or the responsibility you have called me to? Is there something else? Is there somewhere else? I don't think that question ever stops.
But I'm pretty sure that that question is somehow pacified
Mm.
when you do find yourself in a
I think
place.
for certain periods of time.
Yeah. Mhm.
But even when, let's say, you've been doing that for 3 years, there will come a point where you're like, hey, Lord, is this still where you want me?
Yeah.
Is this still the time? Am I not supposed to be somewhere else? Am I not supposed to do something else? Like, is this all you require of me?
Mm-hmm.
Can I do more?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's obvious that those questions still linger in the back of the mind, um, but I know that there are certain pastors that once they find themselves in a place, they say to themselves, "I know this is where the Lord has me,
Mm-hmm.
even to the point of my death." Like
Mm-hmm.
there are pastors that find that, or ministers that find that satisfaction of where they are,
Mm-hmm.
contentment, I guess. And I think maybe that's the answer: is content.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself
Content
content in
where
where
the
you
Lord
are?
has placed you. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
if you,
because I've come to you plenty of times where you've asked me, like, what do you think the Lord has called you to? And I'm like, I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. Do I love playing worship for Him? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah.
thing is I can worship Christ here at my house with my piano.
Yeah.
I don't need to do that at church in order to do that. Is that my calling, though?
Mm-hmm.
Has God called me to just play worship at church? And although I love to do it, I'm happy to do it. Is that truly where God has called me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There
That's
was
good.
a point in my life where all I wanted to do was play worship and I longed for it. But the Lord placed me in the nursery and I would tell Him,
Yeah.
I am here and I love serving kids and I love ministering to kids. But that's not where I wanted to be.
Mm.
And I was like, well, the Lord has called me to here because obviously this is where He wants me. This is where I am.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly asking, Lord, is this where you have called me? What is my calling? Where are you leading me? Where should I go? And am I ever going to get that answer? I know that for now I'm playing worship and this is where God has called me to do. But in the long run, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I would like to say that where I am right now is what I'll do for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something preventing me from doing that now at this moment,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't see myself as a worship pastor, a worship. I emphasize the wrong word, worship pastor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see myself as leading music for the rest of my life,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not the desire of my heart. I don't believe the Lord has called me that primarily.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to do that, but I'm content where I'm
Mm-hmm.
at right now. You know,
Yes.
and I think that's the difficulty is for young men and young women and young families, is they're looking for the movement of God. They're looking for that great move of God. And because they're just desiring it, they're desiring the fellowship, they're desiring the move, they're desiring the fire,
Mm-hmm.
that when they can't find it, they don't find contentment in the stillness.
Mm-hmm.
They don't find contentment in the daily workings, in the
Mm-hmm.
daily struggle, in the daily fight,
Mm-hmm.
because they just want to see the massive victory,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Or I would even say that there's a specific ministry they want to work in, and because they can't, they just don't do anything.
Mm, mm.
And I would have to say, if you want to serve Christ, you're going to serve Christ
Yeah, no matter what.
no matter what,
Yeah.
no matter where. And eventually, the Lord will change your heart. And when you find yourself happy where you don't want to be, the Lord will bless you with where you want to be.
Yeah, just an ongoing theme that's been running through my mind lately, and then we'll start wrapping it up. But I've been thinking about lately just the imagery of the plow. because Christ tells us that we should put our hands to the plow and not look back. And of course, in our modernized way of thinking, we think, well, plowing's not that difficult. We have tractors now.
Yeah.
But it was hard work back
Mm-hmm.
then. Even if you had oxen to do
Mm-hmm.
some of the heavy dragging,
Mm-hmm.
the man carrying or directing the plow would still have to hold tightly and firmly to that and ensure that he was getting straight lines.
Mm-hmm.
And that would take immense strength,
Strength.
hard labor because the ground is always
Hard.
hard. So you have to break through the ground. But the imagery there is hard, laborious work.
Mm-hmm.
It's laboring
Mm-hmm.
over the ministry. It's laboring over the gospel. It's laboring over the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that means sacrifice. Sometimes that means sweat.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means exhaustion. Sometimes that means intense heat, you know?
Yeah.
um, and that means that sometimes, even though we may plow, once you're done plowing, then you go and sow.
Mm-hmm. And then at some point you reap.
Yeah, and then once you sow, you got to water.
Mm-hmm.
You got to wait for the rain. You got to go pull the weeds. You got to go make sure the crow aren't stealing the seed.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure that there's nothing that's going to rob your harvest. And then when the harvest comes, then you can rejoice. But that only comes after the work and the toil and the sowing and the watering and the waiting and the praying and the crying out to God, because
Mm-hmm.
you can do all the work in the world, but God is the one who gives the growth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what happens is because we're in such a culture of instant satisfaction and instant gratification
And comfortability
that
and
we're just like, I just want to see the growth. I just want to see the harvest. I can I
I just want to work very little and get a lot out of it.
I want someone else to do the plowing, the
The
plowing.
plowing.
I want someone else to do the sowing.
Mm-hmm.
I want someone else to do the watering. And then once I let someone else do it, then I'll come alongside for the harvest. Then I'll reap with them. Then I'll rejoice with them. And it's like, with the whole point of the rejoicing is the work
Mm-hmm.
before that, you know. Well, anyways, this video was just thoughts that we've been talking about for 8 years now and desiring to see, and we really want to see. We really do want to see a move of God.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is going to persuade us to not continue working until we see it. That's the point of this video. Is to tell you guys that are watching, nothing should hinder you from dedicating your life,
Mm-hmm.
your family, your work to the ministry of God, to the work of God in His kingdom. Nothing should get in the way of that. Not pains,
Mm-hmm.
not hurts, not issues, not sickness, unless, of course, you're like really sick for many years and you just have to be in the bed.
Yeah. And I think what I would have to say is we know life is hard.
Yeah.
We know life in itself, just living out life without having to do ministry and going to church and all that on top of it. It's hard. We know it. We've lived through it. We're living through it.
Yeah.
We will continue to live through it. But we want to be an example that it is a blessing to serve Christ, even
yes.
through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that to say, look at me, I'm trying to boast, because I am not. I'm not the best example. I am not.
Mm-hmm.
But we wouldn't be telling you things that we don't do ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We want to show you what it means to live out our lives for Christ, and not just say it with our mouths and not do it. So we just want to encourage you. We know it's hard. We know it's hard, but it is more of a blessing.
Yeah, and we know that it can be monotonous.
Mm-hmm.
We know that it can be repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another Sunday. Here's another Wednesday. Here's another evangelism event.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another this. Here's another that. We get it.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing the same things for 8 years now. And I've done the same kind of evangelism house to house. So here's a good example. I go evangelize door to door. I share gospel tracts. I'll talk to people. I'll share the message of the gospel. And I've done it to thousands of homes, probably
Mm-hmm.
thousands of homes in three different states.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 5 people have prayed at the door to give their lives to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by statistical standards,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing doesn't work. What I'm doing doesn't make sense. What I'm doing is irrelevant. 5 out of 2,000 homes.
Mm-hmm.
That's virtually zero, right?
But that's what we've seen. We don't see what's behind the scenes.
Right. We don't see what the Lord is doing with those gospel tracts.
Yeah, because out of those 2,000 homes, how many people that you went to put the gospel tracts?
And
How many did you
right.
talk to?
Yeah, maybe several hundred of people. But the thing is, I don't count the fruit of my labor as who accepted Christ in the moment. Because in some people I'm plowing.
Mm-hmm.
In other people I'm sowing. In other people I'm watering.
Mm-hmm.
And God periodically allows me to have those moments of reaping. Very, very seldom, very little.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of it is not the numbers.
Mm-hmm. The point of it is that you're doing what God has called you to do.
Right. And the point is the work behind it, the faithfulness and the commitment to what you believe the Lord has called you to do. Even in the monotony, even though you've been in the same city, spreading the same gospel, sharing the same message, answering the same questions, getting the same people shutting the door in your face, getting the same people telling you to take those gospel tracts away, to not come to their home. But all of that is irrelevant. All of that is irrelevant. The point is, if you're going to serve God in His kingdom, do it faithfully. Be faithful in the little. Fight the good fight, which means sometimes that fight is going to be really tiring and really frustrating, but
And really hard.
and no recognition, and you're gonna feel like you're in a draw constantly with the enemy. But when the Lord grants the harvest, that's when we rejoice. That's when we rejoice. And that's how it is with every aspect of ministry. And if you're not serving God to any capacity, then you're not part of the work. You're not part of the plowing. You're not part of the sowing. You're not part of the watering. You're not part of any of it. And that's unfortunate because the kingdom needs laborers. That's what Christ told his disciples. Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he would send workers out into the field. Pray, because Christ in his sovereignty knew that the laborers would be few. So I pray that families that have lost heart, I pray that families that are just kind of doing the Sunday thing, that are just kind of so hurt and bitter and calloused, that they would just be stirred for God, that they would just wake up, like you said, wake up, because our Lord is drawing near every day. And when we stand before him, we want to stand before him with a conscience, knowing that we did everything that we possibly could to further his kingdom. Any last thoughts? Oh man, you always do this to me. I don't have all the answers. She talks a lot, sometimes too much, but for whatever reason, when we're on here, she doesn't want to talk.
Maybe it's because he talks through my points.
No, she has a lot to say. She just won't say them.
Anyways, it was a pleasure to speak to you all, to have you see my beautiful face. Just kidding.
Yeah, without her, I don't think anybody would be watching anyways. So
No, I'm just kidding. It was a blessing, though. It is a blessing
yeah, and I think
to
we're
be
gonna do
able
a lot
to.
more so a lot more of these talks. I appreciate these talks and just talking through things, and I appreciate you guys.
I'm just a little more organized when it comes to these things. I like for him to tell me the subject beforehand, to be able to jot down a few different points beforehand. And he's just go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
sorry.
So if you guys have any comments, questions, feel free to post them on Facebook. If you guys have any topics you'd want us to talk about for next time, feel free to suggest them. And most likely we'll do it because...
It could even be biblical questions. You have any
Yeah.
questions, go ahead and ask, and we will make a video and respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't care. We'll do it on anything, everything. Any questions, any comments, any complaints. We'll address them on our next podcast. All right, y'all. I love you guys. Serve God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love one another. Love God. And just work for his kingdom. All right? All right. God bless you guys. Bye.